In a world where some lives are overlooked and forgotten, sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places the world refuses to look. This is the story of a young woman whose hidden gift would change everything. Isabella's alarm sliced through the darkness at 4:30 a.m., a harsh intrusion in the stillness of her small apartment. She silenced it quickly, careful not to wake her grandmother sleeping in the room across the narrow hallway. For a moment, she allowed herself to stay wrapped in the cocoon of her worn quilt, the one possession she'd kept from her childhood home. 5 minutes of peace before the world demanded her presence, not that the world ever truly saw her. The bathroom light flickered twice before settling into a dim yellow glow as Isabella splashed cold water on her face. In the mirror, eyes the color of rain-washed autumn leaves stared back at her. Her mother used to say those eyes held entire worlds within them. Now they just looked tired. She dressed quietly in the dark, the black pants and grey polo that comprised her uniform. The company logo, Elite Cleaning Services, was embroidered over her heart, as if there was something elite about scrubbing other people's toilets. Isabella tucked her long chestnut hair into a practical bun and slipped her feet into comfortable black shoes worn smooth at the heels. Her grandmother's medication sat on the kitchen counter beside a glass of water, arranged with a handwritten note, "Take with breakfast. I love you, Isa." The apartment was small but meticulously ordered, everything in its place. Not a speck of dust dared settle in the home of a professional cleaner. Outside, Boston was still sleeping as Isabella walked 3 blocks to catch the 5:15 bus. The driver, Hector, nodded at her with the familiarity of routine. She was always his first passenger, sliding her fare card through the reader before settling into the same seat every morning, 3rd row right side where the heater blew strongest in winter. "Cold one today," Hector commented as the doors closed behind her. "Spring's taking its time," Isabella replied, rubbing her hands together. This exchange, these 12 words, would likely be the most meaningful conversation she'd have all day. The bus lumbered through gradually awakening streets toward Beacon Hill, where the historic brownstones stood shoulder to shoulder, their windows dark and imperious. Isabella got off at Commonwealth Avenue, walking the final 2 blocks to the service entrance of Millennium Tower. The security guard barely glanced up from his phone as she swiped her ID badge. "Morning, Sam," she said. He grunted in response, eyes never leaving his screen. The staff locker room smelled of industrial cleaner and faded perfume. Isabella stashed her small backpack in locker 24, retrieving her supply caddy. Maritza, another cleaner, entered as Isabella was checking her inventory of microfiber cloths. "You got the penthouse today," Maritza said, her voice tinged with something between envy and pity. "Mr. Dawson's place." Isabella nodded. Jackson Dawson's penthouse was the most demanding assignment in the building. 6,500 square feet of pristine luxury that required absolute perfection. He was rarely there, traveling constantly for his venture capital firm, but his standards never wavered. "Do you need help?" Maritza offered. "I'll be fine," Isabella replied. "I've got 8 hours." The service elevator hummed as it carried her to the 60th floor. When the doors opened, Isabella stepped into a private foyer where floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. Morning light spilled across Italian marble, making the space seem as if it were floating among the clouds. Isabella moved through the penthouse with practiced efficiency, invisible hands bringing order to spaces already more orderly than chaos had any right to disturb. She dusted shelves lined with books that appeared never to have been opened, their spines perfect and uncreased. She polished surfaces that reflected her own face back at her, a ghost moving through rooms designed to impress rather than comfort. In the master bathroom, she cleaned a shower large enough to host a dinner party, with multiple shower heads and a bench carved from a single slab of stone. The closet was bigger than her entire apartment, housing row after row of custom suits, each one probably worth more than what she earned in 3 months. As she worked, Isabella's mind wandered to the art gallery she'd visited on her day off last week, a rare indulgence where she'd spent hours studying brushstrokes and color compositions until her feet ached. She hadn't been able to afford the exhibit catalogue, but the images had burned themselves into her memory. At noon, Isabella took her lunch break on the service stairs rather than return to the staff room. From her backpack, she removed a sketchbook and a small tin of pencils salvaged from art supply store dumpsters, broken leads, worn-down nubs, the cast-offs of more fortunate creators. The sketch began as it always did, with no plan or purpose, her hands moving almost independently of thought. The penthouse had a small study that Mr. Dawson rarely used, evident from the thin layer of dust that accumulated between her weekly cleanings. On the wall hung an original Mark Rothko, fields of color that seemed to pulse with life despite their stillness. Isabella had spent extra time in that room once, not cleaning but standing before the painting, letting it wash over her until tears blurred her vision. Now her pencil captured something of that emotion, not the painting itself, but the feeling it had stirred in her. Bold strokes became delicate shading, her fingers smudging graphite to create depths that shouldn't have been possible with such limited tools. When her break ended, Isabella considered the drawing with critical eyes. Not her best work, but something about it felt honest. She returned to the penthouse, finishing the bedroom and guest bathroom before moving to the kitchen. Here, as always, she found evidence that someone had been there, a single espresso cup in the sink, a New York Times folded on the counter. This was how she knew the house wasn't just a showcase, that somewhere beneath its perfect surface beat the heart of an actual life. The living room was the final space on her list. As she vacuumed between the legs of a modernist coffee table, Isabella noticed a stack of papers had slipped to the floor. Bending to retrieve them, she saw they were architectural drawings, plans for what appeared to be a new building. Bold notes in the margins indicated Charitable Arts Foundation and community access. Isabella found herself intrigued despite her better judgment. Was Mr. Dawson planning something that wasn't just another monument to wealth? She carefully restacked the papers, aligning their edges with geometric precision. As she organized her cleaning supplies for departure, a sharp pain shot through Isabella's hand. A paper cut, small but deep enough to draw blood. She rushed to the kitchen sink, running cold water over the wound. A single drop of crimson had already fallen onto her sketchbook page, which she'd left temporarily atop her supply caddy. "Damn it," she muttered, grabbing a paper towel to blot the stain. In her haste to clean the drop before it ruined her drawing, Isabella didn't notice that a loose page had slipped from her sketchbook. It fluttered silently to the floor, coming to rest halfway under the sleek charcoal sofa. The service elevator arrived with a gentle chime. Isabella gathered her supplies, mind already on the next apartment waiting for her attention. She never checked under the sofa. Why would she? It had been spotless when she arrived. Jackson Dawson stepped into his penthouse at 7:43 p.m., loosening his tie as the door closed behind him. The week had been endless, meetings in San Francisco, Seattle, and Chicago, all blurring together in a haze of pitch decks and balance sheets. All he wanted was a scotch and silence. He kicked off his shoes by the entry, padding across cool marble in his socks. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, but Jackson barely noticed the million-dollar view anymore. He poured 3 fingers of Macallan 25 and carried the crystal tumbler to the living room, sinking into the sofa with a sigh that seemed to deflate his entire body. As he raised the glass to his lips, something white caught his eye beneath the furniture. Frowning, Jackson leaned forward. A piece of paper, probably from the foundation plans he'd been reviewing yesterday. He reached down, retrieving it with long fingers. It wasn't architectural paper. On the page was a drawing unlike anything he'd ever seen, powerful in its rawness, emotional in its execution. It depicted a woman standing before what looked like his Rothko, but the artist had captured something he'd never noticed before. How the painting seemed to be reaching out, embracing the viewer with fields of color that transformed into something like arms, something like comfort. Jackson stared at the drawing, his drink forgotten. There was a signature in the corner, small and delicate, Isabella M. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to find his evening dinner reservation with 2 potential investors. Without hesitation, he tapped cancel and sent a brief apology text. Still holding the drawing, Jackson walked to the window. The city spread before him, thousands of lights representing lives he'd never considered. Somewhere out there was an artist named Isabella M., someone who saw his Rothko, really saw it, in a way he never had. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jackson Dawson felt curious about something that had nothing to do with business. He would find her. He had to. Isabella stood frozen in the doorway of the gallery, unable to reconcile the elegant space before her with her place in it. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the white walls with afternoon light, illuminating the drawings, her drawings that now hung in simple black frames. Each piece represented hours stolen between cleaning shifts, created with materials most artists would discard without a second thought. "There you are." Jackson Dawson's voice carried across the empty gallery. He approached with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his right to occupy any space. "What do you think?" 3 weeks had passed since he'd tracked her down through elite cleaning services, showing up at her next assignment with her sketch in hand. 3 impossible weeks of conversations that left her dizzy, of opportunities she hadn't dared imagine. Isabella searched for words that wouldn't expose her as the imposter she felt herself to be. "It's too much, Mr. Dawson." "Jackson," he corrected gently, not for the first time. "And no, it's not enough. These deserve to be seen." His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a casual touch that nonetheless sent warmth radiating through her body. Isabella stepped away, moving toward the nearest drawing. It depicted a solitary figure, cleaning an empty museum, the artwork on the walls reaching out with ghostly appendages toward the cleaner who couldn't pause to look up. "The opening's in 2 days, Jackson continued. "Grace Sullivan is coming. She's the critic I told you about. And there's a collector from New York who's particularly interested in your use of recovered materials." Isabella nodded, her throat tight. "Who will introduce me?" "You don't need an introduction. Your work speaks for itself." "That's not how the world works," she replied softly. "Not my world, anyway." Jackson's expression softened. In the 3 weeks she'd known him, Isabella had catalogued his faces, the sharp, analytical look he wore in business meetings, the distracted gaze when he checked his messages, and this one, the gentle, attentive expression that made her feel both seen and uncomfortable, as if he were looking at something valuable that might shatter. "Isabella, your world is changing." He gestured around them. "This is the beginning." Outside the gallery, evening traffic crawled along Newbury Street as they walked toward the restaurant Jackson had chosen. Isabella was acutely conscious of her dress, simple black cotton that had seemed appropriate in her bedroom mirror, but now felt woefully inadequate. Jackson wore his usual tailored suit with effortless grace, nodding to the maitre d', who clearly recognized him. "The usual table, Mr. Dawson." "Please, Thomas." Their table overlooked the public garden, trees swaying gently in the spring breeze. Isabella unfolded her napkin, hyper-aware of her calloused hands, the permanent shadow of graphite beneath her fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. "You're nervous about Thursday," Jackson observed, studying her over the rim of his water glass. "Wouldn't you be?" 3 months ago, I was cleaning your bathroom. Now you've arranged an exhibition that people who matter will attend." She paused. "Why are you doing this?" The question had been building for weeks, pressing against her chest like an unfinished breath. Jackson considered her for a long moment. "When I first saw your drawing, it showed me something I'd been living with but never truly seen." "That's rare, Isabella. Most people move through life half blind to what surrounds them." He leaned forward slightly. "You see things differently. Your art speaks to the invisible moments most people miss. Or perhaps you just enjoy the novelty of discovering the cleaning lady can draw," she said, immediately regretting the bitterness in her tone. "Is that what you think?" Isabella looked down at her plate. "I don't know what to think. This doesn't happen to people like me." "That's exactly the problem," Jackson replied. "It should." After dinner, Jackson's driver took them back to Isabella's neighborhood. The contrast between Beacon Hill and her corner of Dorchester had never felt more stark. As the luxury sedan idled at the curb, Isabella turned to him. "Thank you for dinner, and for everything else. Will you be all right for Thursday?" "I can send a car." She shook her head. "I'll take the bus." "It's what I know." Jackson's expression suggested he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "Good night, Isabella." She watched the car disappear around the corner before climbing the stairs to her apartment. Inside, her grandmother sat at the kitchen table, sorting her medications into a weekly pill organizer. "Was that him, the rich man?" she asked in Spanish, eyes bright with curiosity. "Yes, abuela, that was him."
"And he likes your drawings?"
Isabella hung her coat on the hook by the door. "He thinks other people will like them too." "I told you," her grandmother said, closing the pill container with a satisfied click. "When your mother put the pencil in your hand, God whispered in your ear. I always knew someone would notice." Isabella kissed the top of her grandmother's head, inhaling the familiar scent of rosewater and talcum powder. "We'll see, abuela, We'll see. Thursday evening arrived with merciless speed. The gallery hummed with conversation and the delicate clink of champagne flutes as Boston's art elite circulated among Isabella's work. She stood near the entrance, wearing a simple dress purchased with the advance Jackson had insisted upon. Her grandmother's silver cross hung at her throat, something familiar to cling to in this unfamiliar sea. "There's our artist." Jackson appeared at her side, guiding a severe-looking woman toward her. "Isabella, this is Grace Sullivan from the Globe." The critic extended a thin hand. "Fascinating work, Miss Mendez. Raw, certainly, but there's something authentic in your perspective." Her gaze was clinical, assessing. "Tell me about your influences." Isabella felt her mouth go dry. I've studied whatever I could access. Museum visits when possible, books from the library. No formal training? No. Grace made a note in a small notebook. And this theme of invisibility, domestic workers observing but unseen themselves, it's rather on the nose, isn't it? Jackson shifted beside her. "I think there's a powerful authenticity in—" "Let's hear from the artist," Grace interrupted, her eyes never leaving Isabella's face. Isabella took a breath. "I draw what I know, what I see. If that's on the nose, perhaps it's because some truths don't require metaphor." Grace's eyebrows lifted slightly, the first hint of genuine interest crossing her features. "Fair enough." She moved away, stopping before a drawing of hands, workers' hands, cradling a bird made of dust and discarded things. "You did well," Jackson murmured. "Did I? I feel like I'm playing a part in someone else's play." A waiter passed with champagne, and Jackson handed her a glass. "Everyone feels that way sometimes. The difference is that some people are born believing they deserve to be on stage. Others, like you, have to learn it." As the evening progressed, Isabella found herself repeating her story. The cleaning job, her grandmother, the stolen moments with salvaged art supplies. With each telling, the narrative felt increasingly performative, as if she were packaging her struggle into something palatable for people who would never understand what it meant to be unseen. Later, a gallery owner from New York cornered her near her largest piece, a triptych depicting wealth's isolation, with a solitary figure surrounded by luxury but separated from the world by walls of privilege. "Your technique is impressive for someone self-taught," the woman said, her voice honey-smooth. "But I wonder if you've considered expanding your subject matter. There's a market for your style, but perhaps applied to more universal themes." "Universal meaning less uncomfortable?" Isabella asked quietly. The woman smiled thinly. "Meaning more commercially viable. If you're serious about a career, you'll need to think beyond personal grievance." "Is that what you see?" "Grievance? I see potential being limited by perspective." She handed Isabella a business card. "When you're ready to grow beyond this narrative, call me." After she walked away, Jackson appeared at Isabella's side. "Margaret Winters, her gallery could open doors for you. She wants me to draw pretty things that won't make her clients uncomfortable." "That's not what she said." "It's what she meant." Isabella drained her champagne glass. "This was a mistake. I don't belong here." Jackson guided her to a quiet corner. "Listen to me. Every artist faces this moment when the world tries to shape them into something digestible. The great ones choose their own path." "Easy to say when you have options," Isabella replied. "You have options now." His eyes held hers. "The question is whether you'll use them to become who they want or who you are." The gallery began to empty as the evening wound down. Isabella stood before her favorite piece, a drawing of a woman creating beauty from discarded things while the world slept. It was the most honest piece she'd created, done the night after Jackson had first approached her. Grace Sullivan stopped beside her. "This one," she said thoughtfully. "This is the heart of your work." Isabella nodded. "Yes. What comes next?" The question lingered between them. What did come next? More drawings that spoke her truth, or pieces designed to please critics and collectors? Jackson had given her visibility, but the choice of what to do with it was hers alone. "I'm working on something new," Isabella said finally. "It's different." After the critic departed, Jackson joined her. "Successful night. 3 pieces sold, and Margaret wants to discuss representation." Isabella took a deep breath. "I need to show you something." She led him to the back room where her portfolio lay on a table. From inside, she pulled out several large sheets, her newest work, completed during sleepless nights since the exhibition was announced. Jackson fell silent as he studied them. These weren't the careful observations of her previous drawings. These were bold, challenging pieces that depicted the art world itself. The invisible hierarchies, the performative admiration, the commodification of authenticity. In one, collectors with empty eye sockets appraised a beating heart on a pedestal. In another, a cleaning woman's reflection in a polished floor revealed wings no one could see. "These are," Jackson began. "Honest," Isabella finished for him. "This is what I need to show next. Not what they want, but what I see now that I'm inside." His expression was unreadable. "Margaret won't like these. They're confrontational." "Yes. You could lose everything we've built." Isabella touched the edge of a drawing where a small bird made of dust took flight. "Or I could finally find my voice." Jackson looked at her for a long moment, something like pride mixing with concern in his eyes. Finally, he nodded once. "Then that's what we'll show them next." In that moment, standing amid her truth rendered in salvaged pencil and reclaimed paper, Isabella felt the weight of invisibility lift from her shoulders. Whether her choice led to success or ruin no longer mattered. For the first time, she was fully seen not as the cleaning woman or even as Jackson's discovery, but as herself, an artist who refused to look away from difficult truths. The path forward was uncertain, but it was finally, completely her own. Jackson Dawson stood at the back of the crowded gallery, observing the throngs of people gathered around Isabella's newest collection. 6 months had passed since her controversial second exhibition, the one where she dared to turn her artist's eye on the art world itself. The critics had been divided, some dismissing the work as bitter commentary from an outsider, others hailing it as a necessary challenge to the insular community that decided whose art deserved recognition. But this third exhibition, titled Invisible Threads, had silenced even her harshest critics. Isabella moved through the space with a quiet confidence that had been absent during her debut. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, a striking contrast to the fashionable gallery patrons in designer clothing. Yet there was something magnetic about her presence, a certainty that hadn't been there before. She no longer looked like someone who didn't belong. She looked like someone who had chosen to be exactly where she was. Jackson watched as she explained a particularly poignant piece to an elderly couple. The drawing depicted a young boy sitting on a stoop, sketching the cracked sidewalk while the shadows of more fortunate children played at the edges of the frame. It was rendered with such emotional precision that viewers found themselves holding their breath, as if the slightest exhalation might disturb the fragile moment captured on paper. When the couple moved on, Jackson approached. "That one seems to be the favorite." Isabella turned, a smile warming her features. "People connect with loneliness. It's universal." "It's not just loneliness," Jackson said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. He hadn't planned to have this conversation tonight or ever, perhaps. But something about the moment demanded honesty. "It's Dorrington Street in South Boston." Isabella's brow furrowed. "What?" "The stoop, the particular pattern of those cracks in the sidewalk, the way the light falls between those buildings. It's Dorrington Street." He gestured to the drawing. "Where I lived, until I was 11. Isabella stared at him, understanding slowly dawning across her face. "That's not possible. I've never been to Dorrington Street. This is based on the view outside my cousin's apartment in Dorchester." "Similar neighborhoods from the same era," Jackson said with a small shrug that belied the emotion tightening his chest. "But I recognize every detail. That broken concrete has been imprinted on my memory since childhood." Isabella studied him with new eyes. "You never mentioned that I grew up poor?" Jackson's smile held no humor. "It's not exactly the narrative venture capitalists promote about themselves." A waiter passed with champagne, and Isabella took 2 glasses, handing one to Jackson. Around them the gallery hummed with conversations, laughter, the gentle collision of different worlds brought together by art. "My father worked 3 jobs," Jackson continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "My mother cleaned houses in Beacon Hill, not unlike you. We had enough to eat, but never enough for anything extra. Certainly not art supplies. So, how did you?" Isabella gestured vaguely at his bespoke suit, his evident wealth. "Scholarship to Boston Latin, then MIT. I taught myself to speak differently, dress differently. I adapted to survive in spaces that weren't designed for kids like me." He took a sip of champagne. When I saw your first drawing, the one you left in my penthouse, I didn't just see artistic talent. I saw someone who could still perceive the world I'd left behind. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Is that why you helped me? Guilt? Not guilt, recognition. Jackson's gaze moved across the gallery where people from visibly different social backgrounds were engaged in animated discussions about her work. You created something remarkable here. You've made the invisible visible. Before Isabella could respond, Grace Sullivan approached, her critical exterior softened by genuine enthusiasm. Isabella, darling, the Times is calling this exhibition a cultural watershed. Even Harrison is impressed. And that man is impressed by nothing. She nodded toward a tall man, examining a drawing of hands, workers' hands, holding a delicate origami bird fashioned from discarded newspapers. Harrison Belmont? Isabella asked, her eyes widening slightly. The collector? He's asking about your centerpiece, Grace confirmed. The one you've listed as not for sale. Jackson followed, Isabella's gaze, to the far wall, where her largest and most detailed drawing commanded attention. It depicted a woman cleaning an opulent room where the wealthy occupants appeared as translucent figures, ghostly in their privilege, while the cleaner, solid and real, created a small, perfect work of art from materials they had discarded. It was beautiful, painful, and undeniably powerful. That one's personal, Isabella said softly. Everything you create is personal, Grace replied. That's why it matters, but he's prepared to offer an obscene amount of money. She paused. Just thought you should know. As Grace drifted away, Isabella turned to Jackson. When I started, I needed to sell my work. Now it feels like selling pieces of myself. Art has always been commerce. Jackson said. The question is whether the exchange is worth it. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message. She checked it, her expression softening. Abela says the opening made the evening news. She's recording it. Jackson smiled. She must be proud. She is. Isabella hesitated before adding, she also says she isn't surprised. She always believed someone would see what I could do. She was right. As the evening progressed, Isabella circulated through the crowded gallery, speaking with critics, collectors, and most meaningfully to her, ordinary people who had come because they'd heard about the cleaning woman whose art had taken Boston by storm. Jackson observed from a distance, occasionally fielding questions from business associates surprised to discover his role as patron. Near midnight, as the crowd thinned, Harrison Belmont approached Isabella with an offer for her centerpiece that caused a nearby gallery assistant to audibly gasp. Jackson watched as Isabella listened, her expression thoughtful rather than overwhelmed. 6 months ago, the figure would have seemed impossible. Now she merely nodded and promised to consider it. Later, as they walked along the Charles River, the city lights reflecting on the water's surface, Isabella broke their comfortable silence. I want to do something meaningful with the money. If I sell it, it's your choice, Jackson said. You've earned that right. There's a building on Harrison Avenue, she began, her pace slowing. It's been vacant for years, but the bones are good. High ceilings, north-facing windows. Sounds like an artist's dream. Exactly. Isabella stopped, turning to face him. I've been thinking about all the people like me, cleaning staff, service workers, kids from neighborhoods where art supplies are an impossible luxury. What if they had a place to create, to be seen? Jackson studied her face, illuminated by moonlight and purpose. An art school? More than that, a community, a place where talent isn't wasted because of circumstance. Her eyes were bright with conviction. I could use the money from the drawing to purchase the building, establish a foundation. You'd need more than just the purchase price, Jackson cautioned. Renovations, operations, supply. I know, Isabella interrupted. I've done the research. If Harrison's offer is serious, it would cover the purchase and initial renovations. For the rest, she hesitated. I might need a partner. Jackson felt something expand in his chest, pride perhaps, or something deeper. I might know someone who'd be interested. 3 weeks later, Isabella signed the papers for 237 Harrison Avenue, a former textile factory with soaring ceilings and walls of windows. Harrison Belmont's purchase of her centerpiece had indeed provided the capital, while Jackson had quietly established an endowment to ensure ongoing operations. The morning after closing, Isabella stood in the empty main space, sunlight streaming through dusty windows, illuminating possibilities. Jackson watched from the doorway as she walked the perimeter, her hand occasionally brushing against the rough brick walls. "It needs work," she acknowledged when she noticed him. "All worthwhile things do." Isabella smiled, a full expression that transformed her face. "I'm going to call it the invisible hand. Not for Adam Smith's economic theory, but for all the hands that build our world without recognition." "Perfect," Jackson said simply. 6 months of intensive renovations transformed the abandoned factory into a light-filled haven for artistic expression. The ground floor became gallery space where students could exhibit their work alongside established artists. The second floor housed classrooms and studios equipped with materials many students had never had access to. The third floor was dedicated to a residency program where working artists could create while mentoring students from the community. On opening day, Isabella stood before a crowd that reflected her vision: hotel housekeepers and corporate executives, neighborhood kids and university professors, all gathered to celebrate a space where art transcended social boundaries. "The invisible hand exists because we all share a fundamental need to create," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite her nerves. "To express our truth, to be seen and heard. Talent doesn't discriminate by zip code or income bracket, and neither will we." The applause was thunderous. As Isabella cut the ribbon across the entrance, Jackson stood at the back of the crowd, content to witness her moment without inserting himself into it. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose, transcending the initial roles of patron and protégé. 1 month later, Isabella was conducting a tour for potential donors when she noticed a young woman in a cleaning uniform sitting on the floor of an empty studio. The woman was using her break to sketch on a piece of cardboard, so absorbed in her work that she hadn't heard the group approach. Isabella quietly guided the donors to another room before returning alone. She stood in the doorway watching the young woman's hands move with natural grace across her makeshift canvas. The scene was so familiar it made her breath catch herself, not so long ago stealing moments of creation between duties. "That's beautiful," Isabella said softly. The woman startled, scrambling to her feet. "I'm sorry, I'm on break. I didn't think anyone would mind." "No apologies needed." Isabella approached slowly, gesturing to the drawing. "May I?" Reluctantly, the woman handed over the cardboard. On it was a detailed sketch of the studio itself, but rendered as if the walls were transparent, revealing the bustling city beyond, the visible and invisible worlds coexisting in perfect balance. "Maria," the woman said, her accent suggesting Guatemala or Honduras. "I clean the building at night." "I'm Isabella," she returned the drawing with careful hands. "I used to be a cleaner too." Maria's eyes widened with recognition. "You're the one from the news? The artist who started this place?" Isabella nodded. "Have you had any training, Maria?" "No. I've always drawn things." Isabella reached into her pocket and pulled out a card, not the elegant business card of a successful artist, but a simple one that read, "The Invisible Hand Community Arts Center," with her personal cell phone number handwritten on the back. "Our next session starts on Monday," Isabella said, pressing the card into Maria's hand. 6 to 8 in the evening. "Would that work with your schedule?" Maria stared at the card as if it might disappear. "I couldn't have—" "It's free for service workers," Isabella interrupted gently. "That's the whole point." As Maria left, clutching both her drawing and the card, Isabella felt Jackson's presence before she saw him. He stood in the doorway, witness to the exchange. "Full circle," he said quietly. Isabella nodded, watching Maria's retreating figure. One thread connects to another. Outside the windows of the invisible hand, Boston continued its endless rhythm, the visible and invisible citizens moving through their separate worlds. But inside these walls, Isabella had created a space where those worlds could converge, where talent could emerge from the shadows into recognition. And somewhere across the city, in opulent homes and humble apartments, in office buildings and hotel rooms, countless other hands were creating beauty that no one yet could see, waiting, perhaps, for their own moment of visibility, their own thread in the unfolding tapestry.